Today's guest is Caroline Pham, former acting chair of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Chair Pham spent 3 years as a Republican-appointed commissioner and the last 11 months leading the agency with a more crypto-forward agenda, including a slate of initiatives we'll be discussing with her. She also just announced her move to the private sector, where she'll join crypto payments firm MoonPay as Chief Legal Officer and Chief Administrative Officer. Caroline, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. So we always like to start with this first question with all the guests that come on the show. What does crypto in America mean to you?
Crypto in America? Crypto in America is me. I just spent all year making America the crypto capital of the world. So that's what it means to me. I mean, it's an America First agenda about taking all of this crypto activity that's been pushed offshore because of the lack of regulatory clarity in the U.S., and bringing it back onshore, letting Americans come back home. You've heard me talk about making sure that people can come and invest, hire, and build here. So that's what crypto in America means to me. Come home.
Love it. Caroline, when did you first learn about digital assets? When did it come on your radar?
2013. And no, I did not buy any Bitcoin in 2013.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was when I was at the CFTC as counsel to Commissioner Scott O'Malley, and the Bitcoin Foundation came in. So this is something else that I feel like people don't really recognize or give enough credit to the industry, is that they've always wanted to be regulated. I mean, that's why the Bitcoin Foundation came into the CFTC, because they said, we want to tell you what Bitcoin is. It's this new innovation. It's this new development. And do you regulate us? You know, what is Bitcoin under the law? And we did the analysis at that time. So I, started working on whether or not Bitcoin is a commodity back in 2013. And just like we think about it today, it's a store of value. And it is also a means of exchange. And that just really hasn't changed. And then, of course, the CFTC was first to come out and say that Bitcoin is a commodity in 2015. And then we had Bitcoin futures in 2017. I started working on crypto in the private sector probably in 2017 in looking at the Bitcoin futures that was being listed, and then generally in developing policies enterprise-wide for crypto, both for consumers and clients, and then also for employees.
So, Caroline, I know when I was in law school, I definitely wasn't thinking about digital assets or finance. I'm curious, when you were in law school, did you know that you wanted to be involved with markets, or what was that beginning of your career path like?
Actually, it's always been focused on banking. So I worked at a law firm. I worked at Sullivan & Cromwell in the LA office right after I graduated from UCLA. So I worked there for about 3 years, and then the financial crisis happened right when I was starting law school. So, of course, we did a lot of classes and seminars on the financial crisis and financial regulatory reform, which I got interested in because the summer after my 1 year of law school, I actually externed for a judge who was the former chief judge of the Court of Federal Claims. And there was this seminal banking law case called Winstar, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. So my judge was the trial judge on that case. And it was basically about the savings and loan crisis. And Congress passed a law, and it immediately made all of these savings and loans undercapitalized, which meant that they failed. And so they actually sued the government because they said the government caused them to fail by changing the law, which made them all undercapitalized. So it was just a fascinating way to kind of look at some of the parallels from what happened during the savings and loan crisis, and then looking at the financial crisis in 2008, learning all about bank regulation, our banking laws, the business of banking. So that's actually when I got interested in financial services and banking and financial institutions. And then the way I ended up at the CFTC is actually, so after that summer, working for my judge, and then thinking, you know what, this is pretty interesting to me, but there's a lot of different agencies in Washington. Why don't I try to see what internships I could get during the school year and, just learn more about all of these different parts of the financial system. And I do think at that time, of course, swaps, right, was in the news as one of the causes of the financial crisis. So there was a posting for an internship with the CFTC in the enforcement division. And I studied the website really carefully. and I read the whole timeline of the history of the CFTC. So when I went in for my interview, they were impressed that I knew that onions were not commodities. So that's a little hot trivia. Yeah. And then they were asking me, like, why was I interested in the CFTC? And so I am actually from an agricultural part of California. I'm from the Central Valley of California, and I actually did 4-H, and I showed horses. I showed at the California State Fair, and then also my county fair. And so, I kind of talked to them about the background there. And, my family owned some orchards, peach and almond orchards. But then I said, I really like that movie Trading Places. Because it has that great scene, and then it's a comedy. That great scene where they're in like the trading pit in Chicago, and anyway, it worked. I got the internship, and then that's how I started at the CFTC all those years ago. So that's it's been a long time, over 15 years ago. And then after that, I went to the SEC and did the honors program there, and also interned in enforcement, and then back over to the banking law side. So the summer after my 2L year, I split it between being a law clerk at the OCC, which is the bank regulator, and then also a financial services law firm boutique, actually bigger than a boutique now. But it was a great way to just see the whole way around all of the different parts of the different agencies, how they fit together, our messy, beautiful regulatory framework that we have in the United States. When I used to go and speak on international panels and things like that, I used to say, look, like most jurisdictions have this single peak or twin peak model of regulation, right? There's like one financial regulator, or sometimes there's two. There's one that's a prudential regulator, and then there's one that's a conduct regulator. So for example, in the UK, they have that model with the Prudential Regulatory Authority and the Financial Conduct Authority. And I always say in the United States, we have a whole mountain range. We have 5 federal financial regulators. And so it's just, part of what, makes us America.
Yeah, I love the Trading Places shout out. I think the takeaway from that movie is never short orange juice futures.
Definitely.
Fantastic shout out. I'm curious. So you obviously started at the CFTC, and I've heard that you were a very memorable intern. It sounds like obviously going all the way to acting chair, that was a really valuable experience for you. What drew you back to the CFTC, having all those banking regulatory experiences early in your career?
And what city in between, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so my 3L year of law school, I had gotten an offer from the law firm. I had gotten a federal clerkship. And so I was pretty much set to, try to kind of take it easy my 3L year, kind of enjoy myself. And my former supervisor at the CFTC in enforcement had gone up to be a counsel to a commissioner. And he called me up and he said, look, how would you like interning for a commissioner? And it just seemed like one of those opportunities to be in the room, when it's all happening, that you just can't turn down. So the Dodd-Frank Act had just been passed in 2010. It was then CFTC Chairman Gary Gensler. And to just have the CFTC be tackling this huge piece of legislation and writing the rules for it. This kind of sounds familiar right now, right, everybody? It was just a really great opportunity. So I actually spent a whole year interning for Commissioner Malia, my 3L year of law school. And then I actually stayed home to have my daughter and took some time off. But then when I went back to work, I went back to work in Commissioner Maya's office. And so that's where I really got my start with implementing the Dodd-Frank Act, working on the rulemakings at the CFTC. And then so when I went over to Citi, it was to then, implement these rules that I had worked on when I was at the CFTC. And it was, it's like you learn hands-on how hard it is when you have a lack of regulatory clarity, right? Because when you are trying to build out systems and controls and you're writing policies and procedures, it has to be black or white. You need to know if something is a violation of a policy. If it's not a violation of a policy, you have to program the logic for your controls a certain way. And so the gray area is not something that works. But, regulators, when you write rules, oftentimes you do leave a lot of gray area and sort of figure people will implement it and kind of figure it out afterwards. And so I think that's where I just got to learn, again, on the other side of it, what happens when you have to implement rules that have a lack of regulatory clarity, that aren't clear or that aren't fit for purpose, where it doesn't match the underlying market, all of those things. So it was, 5 long, hard years that I spent in an implementation role doing strategy and transformation, first starting with global markets across all asset classes, then doing it enterprise-wide across all of Citi. And then I moved into some different roles after that. But that's what I spent the first 5 years doing. So how did this lead me back to the CFTC? Well, so when I was at Citi, I ended up becoming the global head of swap dealer and Volcker compliance. So swap dealer is obviously the CFTC. And I had a lot of leadership roles in different industry working groups. And so I think I've just always been someone that people have thought of in the industry. And when the opportunity came to come and serve as a commissioner, that was something that I thought, how, again, could I pass this up when there's so many important issues that are before the agency? And I actually have this practical hands-on experience that I spent, my blood, sweat, and tears, learning on the job. So, and I've always wanted to serve my country. I actually signed up for Army ROTC after 9/11.
Oh, wow.
Just with my family's personal story of having, come over here. My parents actually on the last day of the Vietnam War got airlifted from the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. So it's something where we've always felt very grateful and always wanted to serve and give back.
What an amazing career. And your career's still going on, but I think something that you brought up before that I wanted to ask you about is you talked about the regulatory clarity aspect, and you're joking about, onions not being commodities. And then when I think of commodities, I used to cover oil trading. So like energy, of course, but then there's agriculture, metals, etc. And crypto is one of the newer categories on that front. When you think about crypto in comparison to these other economic goods or resources, how does it really fit in? For our audience, they obviously know what commodities are on the grand scheme, but from, someone who was so tapped in at the CFTC, how do you kind of think about that from an internal perspective?
Sure. So I'll give you my view, right? So the way I think about it, a lot of times when people are talking about different crypto assets, they're talking about network or protocol tokens, right? Those are some of the most, popular and sort of largest sort of market cap. And I actually think of them as consumables, right? So something that you use or you consume, that's a commodity. And I love that you brought up energy, because in a lot of ways, it's very similar to that. I mean, you have to use ETH as the gas to power the Ethereum network, right? And it's the same thing, just like you use gas to power your car or a factory, you use ETH to power that network. So to me, that makes it pretty clear that they're utility tokens, and utility token is not a security. And so that's why I think, why does it make sense if they're in our markets? Well, because they're consumables, just like a lot of other different kinds of inputs and commodities in the real economy.
Bitcoin might sound complicated, but the Gemini credit card makes it simple. Use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. No annual fee, and right now you can grab a $200 Bitcoin intro bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stash. Go to gemini.com/CIA to learn more. Terms apply. Caroline, was there ever a moment when you were at Citi? I think you mentioned you've been dealing with digital assets since about 2013, but when you were there, was there ever a time when you kind of realized that there was something there with crypto and with digital assets? Did you ever think that this blockchain technology would make regulators rethink the way that markets work?
Oh, 100%. Yes. So I remember very clearly it was in 2018. And I was the head of FMI compliance for markets. So FMI is financial markets infrastructure. So you kind of end up with 5 jobs. And so that was one of my 5 jobs. And I was talking with the business head of FMI. And, we were talking about blockchain technology. We were talking about some of the pros and cons of it. And I'm like, well, look, so you have this blockchain technology. It is much more efficient. It minimizes all of this operational risk. It's a really good record keeping system that does not need to be reconciled the way that, our current financial system works. So I basically said, look, if we are the bank that is the pipes and plumbing for the whole world, what do we do when better pipes and plumbing comes along? I mean, I think a lot of times when people talk about blockchain technology, I mean, again, it's a really good record keeping system. And it is kind of boring because it's really infrastructure. So when people try to make crypto out to be evil or bad, I mean, it's a technology, right? I don't know how you characterize a technology with, evil or good, right? It's just technology. It's how you use it. So that was really the moment where I realized and thought that, this probably is going to end up being the rails for, a future financial system. But it's not just financial market infrastructure or payments infrastructure. I actually think that when you consider the broader world, and so I worked on the metaverse when I was at Citi, and I wrote a speech that I gave in 2022 on the metaverse and how we should regulate the metaverse. But when you think about virtual worlds and you think about how you record or you effectuate or facilitate transfers or transactions, whether it is a financial transaction or you have some skin in your video game that you want to give to somebody else, right? I mean, that all can be powered on the blockchain technology. And so that's what people are calling Web3. And so I just think this larger thing about Web3 being the next generation internet, I mean, that's why all of this needs to come together. And that's why regulators do need to pay attention to it, because it's going to be how we transfer, everything, anything around the world. That's how you record ownership. I mean, a lot of times I feel like what is a, token? I mean, it's the right to use something or to own something or to, transfer something.
Yeah, Caroline, we were talking on that note before we started recording about making the CFTC great again, and you've definitely done your part on that initiative. So you guys launched under your leadership, and it was kind of a flurry there. So a lot of things coming out.
I like to have a strong finish.
Yeah. So over half.
It's like the grand finale in a fireworks show. So like you think that you're done with the 4th of July fireworks, and then like there's a flurry at the end, and so that's what it was.
Yeah, and so of those half a dozen pro crypto initiatives that you guys rolled out there, what do you think will be the most impactful for the industry, or which one are you kind of most proud of getting out there?
So the one that is the most impactful by far is the tokenized collateral guidance, because again, when you think about collateral management, so our derivatives markets are something like 700 trillion gross notional. It's the largest financial markets in the world, and the CFTC has global jurisdiction. These are global markets. So when you consider the collateral, so that's when you have to post margin if you're trading on margin, right? Or, collateral that you have to put in to secure your trade. We are talking trillions of dollars. And so by making it more efficient, so for example, by tokenizing US treasuries or tokenizing treasury money market funds, you are creating these operational efficiencies and also capital efficiencies, because the transfer of value can be immediate. You're not looking at T+2 settlement or T+1 settlement. It's real-time settlement. That means that your capital is not locked up for all that time. That means you can redeploy it to other uses. So as far as just the sheer impact and what it's going to do to sort of free up capital around the world that can then be redeployed to other uses, right? Like one of the priorities that I had working with the administration was to lower the cost of living for everyday Americans. And so when I thought about what we could do at the CFTC for that, number one, we could make sure that we have well-functioning commodity markets and that the prices in our markets are good prices. There's nothing that's influencing those prices that shouldn't be, that we have market integrity. Number two, to increase the flow of credit to U.S. businesses and households. And then number three, to unleash U.S. energy production and American energy dominance. So the blockchain technology actually fits really well into that second one about increasing the flow of credit to U.S. businesses and households, because if you don't have a bunch of capital just kind of locked up and parked somewhere, then yes, you can use that for lending. So that's by far going to have the biggest impact on our financial system, on the economy. But I think the other thing that's impactful, but in a different way, is having the listed spot crypto on our CFTC registered futures exchanges. Because, look, if you look at what happened on October 10th, right, you had some offshore platforms that had auto liquidation and there were uncontrolled losses for retail traders. And, you just can't have that happen in a CFTC regulated futures exchange. Our rules don't allow that. And anyhow, we should be onshoring all of this activity. We should be making sure that Americans can have safe U.S. markets with a clear regulatory framework, the same regulatory framework that has worked for our securities exchanges and our futures exchanges for the last 100 years. It's the gold standard. It has the best liquidity formation, capital efficiency, investor protection, retail protection, and the rules are clear and people are already connected into it. And so that is, I think, also very immediately impactful in a way that you can kind of touch and feel. So that's something I'm really excited and proud of.
Mm-hmm. You took the next question out of my mind, Caroline. I was going to ask you about the leverage spot trading through the CFTC. That was like a huge step for retail traders, and it's usually an area I would argue that the agency doesn't really focus on too much, right? So do you think the CFTC is prepared to take on more additional oversight of retail as it gains additional jurisdiction over spot markets under the new market structure, or is this kind of a one-time scenario?
So we have always had retail in our markets. We do, of course, have what's known as really large institutional markets, because a lot of what people use our markets for is to hedge their business and commercial risks. So those are what we call commercial end users. Or financial institutions or multinational companies who need to hedge their, foreign exchange risk, their interest rate risk, their credit risk, all of those different types of things. But at the same time, we've always had retail in our markets. And I actually wrote a whole speech because I got so frustrated by people saying this. Actually, I was on a panel with somebody who was just saying things that were just flat out not true. We were in Aspen. And so it made me go off and write a speech about it. So this is a speech that I gave at R3 Corticon, I think in 2023. And it just outlined all of the different ways that the CFTC touches retail. And I actually proposed at that time an Office of the Retail Advocate, because I said, look, there is this increased direct access to markets that is possible by technology. We've just got these incredible innovations in our markets. And so we want to make sure that we're studying it thoughtfully and keeping up with it and making sure that we have the right protections in place. So I said, well, why not have an Office of the Retail Advocate, which is based on what the SEC has, an Office of the Investor Advocate, and then also the SBA also has an advocacy office. So that's a proposal I made back then. And I think it's, of course, really important that we always think about being holistic and making sure that we have the protections in place. But again, the reason why CFTC markets didn't have any issues during the financial crisis is because the regulatory framework is strong and resilient.
Under market structure, Caroline, the CFTC is set to take over more jurisdiction of retail. You said you do have some right now, but with the spot trading of digital commodities, right? That is going to be more oversight, more work, potentially more staffers for you guys. I say you guys, I keep saying it like you're still there, but you know what I mean, for the CFTC.
I can't talk to the CFTC for a year, so.
Right, exactly, yes, as part of your ethics agreement. Well, the CFTC historically has a smaller appropriations budget than the SEC by quite a bit, but how much more do you think the agency might need to properly regulate crypto?
Yes. So I think it's actually more a question about doing capacity building and doing training and upskilling. Because look, I used to implement new regulatory requirements or do significant change management across a global bank that's got 230,000 employees. And that is in, almost 100 countries, like physically located in 100 countries, and then has customers in, over 160 countries. So it is not the case that you just want to throw bodies at a problem, right? Like that does not actually fix anything. What I think is really important, and this is some of what I've been really proud of doing this past year, is I actually developed a skills development program, a professional development program. So the CFTC actually finished procuring training, specialized training. I'm forgetting what it's like CFTE, but they do training for regulators and banks and financial services firms all over the world. They have these great, robust programs, and you can get a certificate from them. So I actually, brought that program over to the CFTC. I think it's going to launch next year, and there will be able to be, CFTC staff who were nominated by their managers to participate in this program and to develop that training. So I think that's super critical. That's really important. Then there's, of course, you want to get the technical experts in, right? So I had proposed as well that we ought to have centers of excellence. That's what you have when you're at a large company or a large firm, is you create this like specialized expertise. So it's a center of excellence. And then so when you have those experts, like sort of like a small SWAT team, they like fan out across the organization and help to drive the change, and then also to train everybody to handle the new process, or the new subject matter or the new area. So that's also really important, because if you want something to be sustainable and to be BAU, you have to embed it into people's everyday. So with crypto being this asset class that is under the CFTC's jurisdiction, everybody needs to be able to regulate it, right? But at the same time, it's not rocket science that there's something so specialized about it. For example, we have, probably hundreds of different kinds of commodities, physical commodities that are under our regulation. And so not everybody is an expert in oil or in soybeans or in gold, right? Or in interest rates, or in, foreign exchange, different currencies, or in, equities, or et cetera, et cetera. So it's really why the CFTC has a principles-based regulatory framework, because of the sheer number of different kinds of commodities and products that we have in our markets.
Are you saying that there may not need to be much more money spent then on crypto, that the CFTC could maybe do it with the bodies and the numbers that it has right now?
So I saved about $50 million in annualized cost savings at the CFTC. And so you can take that 50 million and you can hire these centers of excellence that I just described, right? So, it's just like when you have your, allowance, your budget, your household budget, you have to stay within your budget, right? We are in a period of time where we need to make sure that the American taxpayer is getting every value out of their dollar. So I think it's important to be prudent with the money that you have, and we have a fiduciary duty to look after it. So now I'm saying we too, so I'm still saying we, but it's just something that is just so important to me. And I think it's just something that obviously was like the first thing that came to me, because I worked at a public company. I worked at a bank. I worked at a public company. When you're at a public company, right, you have to deliver value for your shareholders. You have that fiduciary duty, like I said. And so every quarter you have your quarterly earnings call, and you're being held accountable for, how you are spending your budget. And so just coming from that kind of environment with a high level of accountability, with the focus on budgeting, with the focus on cost controls, just taking some like very basic cost management principles and taking it over to the CFTC. I mean, it was not hard to save the $50 million, really. I mean, there's a lot of duplicative contracts. There were contracts that we didn't need, that we found out people weren't using. There was, office space that we didn't need. Now, a lot of people did choose to retire or to leave the agency. And so that gives you an opportunity to hire new people that have new skills. So I think the agency definitely needs to do some capacity building, but I also think that we have a lot of resources already that we should use wisely.
Caroline, I have to ask, you obviously got a lot done at the CFTC. You also mentioned earlier that you came in under former chair Gensler. And, we look for hot takes on the show, and I'm sure you're in the private sector now. Welcome to the other side. So very curious about your opinion. He had or has what I'll call some very fluid opinions of crypto and the industry. If you go back to some of his MIT lectures, and then you see the way he obviously chaired the SEC, where do you think that kind of went sideways, or what do you think was misunderstood about the industry during that time period?
I think you had some bad actors that ruined it for everybody, right? You had some big frauds, you had big scams, you had people who were doing pump and dumps, right, with ICOs. And so I think the natural reaction from any regulator is if there's, frauds or scams, obviously you want to protect your markets, you want to protect your, the public from that. But then it's how you look at it, right? So you can try to, stamp it out. You can, bring a bunch of enforcement actions. You can do a lot of things which will, address those bad actors. But if you don't look at a holistic approach to understand what is the root cause, or what are the other things that come along with being a nascent industry or asset class, right? There's a lot of difference between someone having a registration, a so-called registration violation, when there aren't any rules about, how does this, what is an exchange when you think about DeFi, right? We don't have any rules about that. And if the agency refuses to write rules about it and instead brings enforcement, that's exactly regulation by enforcement, right? It's a gotcha game, because people would come and they would ask, and they were invited to come in and talk to the regulators, right? And then there'd be enforcement attorneys waiting there.
Yeah, leave with the Wells notice. Yeah.
So it's just, I don't think that's acting in good faith. And I think that's where, again, going back to my story about the Bitcoin Foundation back in 2013, they wanted to be regulated. And there were a lot of efforts in the industry in 2017 and 2018 to be regulated, right? There were people trying to create self-regulatory organizations. So, for example, there was one that was called the Virtual Currency Association. I think that was maybe the first effort. And I wish back then, if the regulators had assumed good intent and worked hand in hand with the industry that was trying to be regulated and trying to create clear rules of the road and trying to protect the market and protect the public, we would be in such a different place right now. Let's go back to my listed spot crypto initiative. People have been trying to do this since at least 2020 with the CFTC. But instead of implementing this provision in Dodd-Frank, which requires that if you have leveraged, margined, or financed retail commodity transactions, it has to be traded on a futures exchange, the agency just refused to allow it. And if we had had all of this being traded on futures exchanges since 2020, again, think about maybe some of the horrible frauds or collapses that we could have avoided, because it would have been subject to our regulatory framework and our protections.
Yeah. Caroline, you began advocating for these regulatory sandboxes at the CFTC, as we talked about Gary Gensler and era, but also just amid the broader Biden admin crypto crackdown. Can you kind of explain what it was like during that time, being a regulator in the administration that was so arguably anti-crypto, and yet, you had a positive stance on it?
The last couple of years were very frustrating, because this goes back to what I was saying about, I wish regulators or policymakers would assume good intent. So blockchain technology, tokenization, crypto assets, it's not new, right? It's not new. So I actually started working on pilots and regulatory sandboxes involving blockchain technology when I was at Citi in 2018, because Singapore had put together a regulatory sandbox. They had Project Ubin, and it was really to test blockchain technology as a future financial market infrastructure. And so it was with banks and other institutions like that, right? So people have understood and people know how to do regulatory sandboxes. They've been doing it all around the world. The UK also was very early with the regulatory sandbox. I worked at a global bank. I was part of the team that was reviewing and making decisions about where to test this technology in different, regulatory sandboxes or pilots under, which jurisdictions. So to have this really practical hands-on knowledge. So, let me give some examples. So I, for example, worked on developing the first policy around employee trading in cryptocurrencies, right? So if you are an employee of an investment bank, you can't trade in like single name stocks. So here's this question, like, should you be able to trade in Bitcoin? What's the policy going to be on that? So I worked on developing that. I was part of the team that provided the first briefing to the board of directors on risks involved with cryptocurrencies, and that was in 2018. Looking at policies like, should people be able to use their credit cards to fund crypto wallets? So having been working on all of this and knowing that everybody around the world is working on this and that it's real, it's a real thing. And then to have the last administration act like it was fake, or that there wasn't any utility to it, or, it's like an ostrich head in the sand approach. That was just very frustrating because I was part of the team. I've been reviewing and approving blockchain and digital asset projects, with City Ventures, with strategic equity investments, partnerships, vendors, new clients across the whole bank since 2018, right? It's actually pretty cool to see a lot of those, pitches that we got back then and the early investments that were made, and then seeing how those startups have just really taken off and flourished, right? It's really exciting to kind of see the entire ecosystem grow and evolve since 2018. And then, I became the global lead for digital asset advocacy globally, regulatory advocacy with all the regulators around the world. I also led all of the supervisory examinations, by bank regulators of blockchain technology and digital assets globally around the world with all the different regulators. And then worked on a lot of the product development, worked with the innovation labs, worked on the product roadmap, all of those things. So actually building it. And I was on the new products approval committee. So that all culminated in me becoming the head of market structure for strategic opportunities, which was in the investment bank's business development team, which specifically had digital assets as its remit. So again, it's a real thing. And for me to have been spending all of this time and all of these years knowing that it's a real thing and knowing how to approach it, knowing how other jurisdictions are approaching it, and then just running into this like brick wall over the last several years in the last administration was just incredibly frustrating. So I wish I could say that a regulatory sandbox was like my own original idea. It's not.
Sure, yeah.
People have been doing them for a long time. But I do think one of the things that I like to say is that there are actually no new problems. You just have to find people who remember the old solutions. I feel like everything's cyclical, right? Like things keep popping up, over and over again. And so having people remember that when there was this last kind of, burst of product innovation in CFTC markets, that was in the 1990s. And so the CFTC did a lot of pilot programs in the 1990s to explore some of these innovations. And so it's like, look, guys, maybe we haven't done this recently, but we used to do these. And so that's when I went back and looked at a lot of the pilot programs that the CFTC had done previously in the past successfully, looked at a lot of the pilot programs that the SEC had been doing, which they do those more frequently. And I worked on some of those when I was in the private sector. And then that's how I designed my regulatory sandbox proposal that I did in 2023.
There's been a lot of criticism around regulators not being able to own or trade crypto, right? Because I think it's contributed to some of that misunderstanding of what crypto actually is and how it works. I mean, you mentioned that you worked on the initiative for traders, who weren't allowed to trade single asset stocks. Do you think something like this could have helped? I mean, it's still not allowed, right? I think there's a push towards making it
It's not allowed.
potentially be allowed, right? But
I had to sell my Bitcoin in Ether, which is tiny, like a tiny amount. But I had to sell it when I became a commissioner.
Yeah. I mean, is that like, could that have helped maybe? Like, I don't know really, like my question is like, could that have contributed to a more like effective understanding for regulators maybe in the past administration? Or do you see that changing at all? Like, could that be something that we see change in the future where regulators can actually own crypto as maybe more of a means of understanding it?
I honestly don't know that it makes that much of a difference. I think it's all about your mindset, right? It's all about your attitude. Are you curious and you want to learn about it? Or are you not, right? So the three like core values that I used to frame my chairmanship back in January, so sort of like your first principles, like your home base that you come back to, was basically like three things, right? So mission, like, is this the CFTC's mission? Number two, markets. Is this good for the markets? Does this make the markets better? And then three, mindset. Are we approaching this with the right mindset? And I think a lot of times where you find that people get frustrated with their regulatory relationships is because there's not the right mindset. So there's a skepticism or there's an assumption that, everything is a trick or that it's bad or that people are trying to evade the law or get around the regulator. You're just assuming bad intent. And that is not productive. I mean, imagine if you kind of went through your life and everybody you ran into, you sort of had that mentality, or your coworkers. It is not a healthy way to live, right? So I think if you are open-minded, so I used to talk all the time about having a growth mindset, right? Let's be open-minded. Let's have a growth mindset. Let's be curious. Let's be lifelong learners. That's what's really important, because there were so many things that I worked on when I was at Citi that, of course, I didn't know how to do it myself. I mean, it's a global bank, right? With, I was across both institutional and consumer businesses. But by being curious and by sitting down with the people who are experts in it and learning from them, that's why, I don't know if you remember, but I actually, as a new commissioner, I kicked off what I called a learning tour. So I actually just went to a lot of different cryptos and had them demo for me what their products were, how it worked, showed me, like I went to Uniswap and Uniswap showed me like, how you can swap in and out. And it was so fascinating. And that's exactly how you learn, because I used to do the same thing when I was writing policies and procedures, when I was a compliance executive, because you need to go understand what is the thing that you're trying to write the policy around, right? And as regulators, exactly to your point, you need to understand the thing it is that you're trying to regulate. But there's a lot of different ways to try to understand it.
Yeah. So Caroline, you mentioned earlier the wish that this regulation or this clarity had come sooner to these markets, right? I like the comparison to kind of derivatives in the 90s and that sort of treatment of an asset class. I'm not sure if you overlapped at all with Chris Perkins while he was at Citi, but we've had him on.
Chris is my very good friend. We worked closely together for over 5 years. He's on my Global Markets Advisory Committee. He's been a huge leader. He's led a lot of really important work streams on the Digital Asset Market Subcommittee.
Yeah, so he's talked a lot about this idea that you kind of just echoed of, we had this enormous liquidation on October 10th, right? And it really damages the industry when we have these kind of fallouts. And one of his points that I'm curious about your take on was essentially that if this was a regulated market, this essentially would not function this way. And so you wouldn't...
Yeah, you couldn't do that.
Yeah, so I guess, can you just expand on like how would markets function better, or how do you anticipate them functioning better now that these assets are firmly under the CFTC's domain?
When you look at our regulatory framework, like any market regulator, right? So I represented the CFTC on the board of the International Organization of Securities Commission. So that's an international organization of all the securities regulators in the world, right? Generally speaking, and again, I used to write global markets policies and procedures when I was at Citi. So all market regulators, like all exchanges all over the world, right? There are some key things that you have that are the rules, right? You have to have rules around financial resources, around risk management, around market integrity, market conduct, transparency, conflicts of interest. All of these things are just really standard. And so that's why I keep saying that we need to bring it inside our existing regulations. It's also the fastest way to get it implemented, right? I wrote an op-ed back in March where I said, I could stand up a regulatory framework around spot crypto in 12 to 18 months at the CFTC. I actually did it faster by getting it on the futures exchanges in just I started in August and I had it done by December, right? So 4 months. Can't do math.
4 months.
Yeah. And but it's because there's these ideas that have been around for a long time. So, just specifically looking at the October 10th example. So you can't do auto liquidations in CFTC markets like that, right? And I had heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but I had heard that exchanges were basically forcing the auto liquidations and then taking the other side of those trades and profiting from it. Okay, that's a clear conflict of interest. You can't do that in a CFTC market. So I think these are just some of the very basic common sense protections that just generally speaking, all regulated markets have these, like whether you're in the US, you're in Europe, you're in Asia, these things are prohibited because of protections. It goes back to the whole thing, there's no new problems. There's just people who need to remember what happened, what was the old solution. So a lot of the protections that are in place for our securities exchanges and for our futures exchanges is because of the Great Depression.
Yeah, just thinking about that, everybody is kind of the opinion, right, that waiting for market structure for something to happen, right? But so much of what, what you've done at the CFTC is actually just taken existing rules and abilities that the agency had and just making them, putting them into effect essentially. So kind of just goes to show that a lot can be done in the interim.
I've been working on it since 2018 with some of the top product people in the world and some very smart and expensive lawyers.
Yeah. There you go.
Sure. There we go. Yeah. Caroline, your last day at the CFTC was yesterday, December 22nd. We're recording this on December 23rd. It'll go out on the 24th. We move fast here. But you're heading to MoonPay now to be the Chief Legal and Chief Administration
I'm at MoonPay right
now.
now.
You're physically
currently
in MoonPay's office right now. Yes. You moved quick.
Yes.
We're in there. I think I would love to know personally, what's next for you there? And what are you really trying to accomplish now that you're migrating to the private sector? And why MoonPay? Because I'm sure you got a lot of offers.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I love this. So let's just talk about the origin story for me and MoonPay, because also Keith Grossman, who's the president of MoonPay, gets a big kick out of this story. And I know Eleanor knows the story.
I think I saw it on Twitter, right? Yeah. Go.
And he posted it on Twitter because he likes to embarrass me. So that's wonderful. Thanks, Keith. But yeah, so we were at a conference. We were both speaking at the Christie's Art and Tech Conference in 2023, and we were both seated next to each other at the speaker dinner. And, we just sort of started talking and hit it off. He's the former president of Time. He had been at Bloomberg. And so, we were just having a good time. Then he told a really bad joke. So I actually probably need to get Keith the mug that says dad jokes are deadly or something like that. So he made this bad joke and I started laughing, choking laughing.
Yeah.
And then that's what he posted on Twitter was, or on X, oh my God, he thinks he killed a regulator or something. But it was just really funny. And it clearly was an icebreaker. And we just kept in touch. So Keith's become a great dear friend of mine over the years. Ivan as well. We've been at a lot of the same conferences, a lot of the same events. MoonPay is crypto payments infrastructure. It's not something that the CFTC regulates, right? It's a vendor. It's a service provider. But I come from banking. So I think that's something that even though I started my career at the CFTC, I kind of went out into the world and grew up. And so I was a senior bank executive, again, globally across both institutional and consumer businesses and all lines of business. So I've always been paying close attention to the banking space, to payments. I worked in a lot of, fintech issues, worked in a lot of, advocacy around that. And I think just having that relationship when I decided I wanted to go back to the private sector. So it is hard to look for a job when you're a regulator because you want to be really careful, obviously. And there are a lot of different ethics restrictions for good reason, right? It's really important that we have these rules in place. But I've also been in government before, so I know all the rules already because I already left government once, right? So I decided that the best way for me to, basically start thinking about going back to the private sector was to just announce it on live TV. Because that is going to be the most transparent way to just tell everybody. And then also, it's a really great reverse solicitation. Now everybody knows that I'm going to go back to the private sector, so then people can reach out to me. Because again, as a regulator, like it's like you can't really reach out to people. It's just I think it's not a good approach. So once I announced on live TV on Bloomberg TV from that same conference that we were both at, Eleanor, that I was looking at going back to the private sector, a lot of people started reaching back out to me. And to be, perfectly honest, a lot of people who were reaching out to me are from the banking and fintech space because I was a senior bank executive at Citi. There's not a whole lot of former big bank executives with the kind of regulatory background that I have. So, knowing both the business side and the regulatory side and the legal side and the compliance side and the risk side. So, that was really exciting. That was really interesting. And then when I was asking Keith for advice, I think a light bulb went off for Keith where he was like, wait, Carolyn should come join MoonPay and be on our team, right? I don't want to lose her to somebody else. So, thank goodness for that. And so Ivan and Keith wanted to bring me on. Now, as you all know, I thought I was going to be leaving the agency in August. So I had actually, recused myself from MoonPay, recused myself from other people that I was talking to, recused myself from certain, entire issues or topic areas. So I just did these sort of broader recusals just to make sure that everything was above board. I worked with the CFTC's ethics office, with the ethics council. I have ethics opinions, very heavily documented because I'm a former compliance executive. And so, I had a job at MoonPay in August and I was really excited. I thought I was going to be able to start by the first day of school because that's what my daughter wanted. She said, Mom, can you please have a new job? Because you've missed every single first day of school for the past, however many years. And then obviously that didn't happen. And since I was still at the agency, I'm like, well, let's go do more things, right? You can just do things. So it was great to be able to have that opportunity to launch the crypto sprint, to do listed spot crypto, to do the tokenized collateral guidance, to do the digital asset pilot for Bitcoin, ETH, and stablecoins, USDC collateral, right? I mean, these are huge things that we managed to get done. Plus, I unleashed American energy dominance, which was super huge. I mean, that's potentially going to be billions of dollars in energy savings. So there's always a silver lining, but yes, I'm really happy to finally be here.
Yeah, Caroline, you mentioned that timeline of wanting to transition out in August. There was obviously a bit of a snag to that. Of course, Brian Quintenz was nominated for the role. And then over sort of a series of events that I think crypto Twitter was pretty fascinated with, or at least the legal community was fascinated with, that nomination was then withdrawn. What do you think maybe prompted that opposition or sort of led to this kind of revised timeline? And obviously we want to talk about our friend Mike Selig. So, very happy about the way things worked out. But what was that time period like? And where do you think that process kind of got snagged up, earlier this year? I
don't know. Right. I mean, it was such a strange time. I don't like to speculate, right? Like I do my job, right? I get told to do a job. I do my job. What I am happy about is that, look, in August, I had a meeting with Secretary Bessent. He asked me to get the agency ready to take on expanded oversight over crypto and digital assets. And so I said, got it. I'll go do that. I mean, that's exactly what I did is I deliver results, right? I execute. I'm an operator. That's what I did at Citi, was to drive strategy and transformation. So I was focused on launching the crypto sprint, on working together on Project Crypto with the SEC, on getting the CFTC, with its best foot forward, with trying to develop, like I said, some of that capacity building around crypto and digital assets. And just, really importantly, getting everything ready so that the permanent chairman, now Mike, can hit the ground running. And again, because America's already lost so much time. I mean, I just told you that, Singapore has been working on regulatory clarity for digital assets since 2018. So it was just so important to get something stood up because, Americans can't afford to wait any longer. I mean, this is something I said and I posted, right? Americans deserve safe U.S. markets now.
You mentioned Mike Selig, obviously Caroline, and he was sworn in yesterday. And I think the crypto community is very excited to have him on board. You set up a lot of great initiatives for him to be able to hit the ground running. But what would you say his biggest challenges are going into that agency as someone who's been there for the amount of time that you have and as someone who's led the agency for the last year?
I think with any organization, you're going to have part of the organization that is really excited by new things, right? They embrace new things. They have an open growth mindset. They're eager to take on new challenges. And I mean, this is like anywhere, right? I mean, this could be, it could be like a PTA. It could be like your workplace. It could be, like a sports team or something like that. So there's those people who love to kind of take on new challenges. There are other people who are afraid of change or who don't like change. And so, that just comes with the territory of, people. I mean, this is like human beings, it's like human nature. And I think that's going to be hard, right? Because you have to really be able to provide that purpose and the comfort to the people who don't want there to be any change. To understand that, things are changing, right? And so, you need to, learn new things. I think that's going to be one of the things that's hard just because it's just part of, managing any kind of organization. There's challenges like that. There's going to be, I think, Mike's going to come in and he's going to develop his own agenda and he's going to decide what his priorities are. So I think it's going to really depend on what he wants to prioritize and how.
You mentioned kind of new things and old rules, and we can't let you go without asking about prediction markets, right? So there's been a huge surge. Prediction markets have been around for a while, right? Like Polymarket is, this new version of it, but these options being traded, that's been around. There's clear rules there. It seems like there's a real sort of conflict or sort of a run-up between sort of sports betting and prediction markets that's led Coinbase to now sue the states where they're sort of declaring some of these prediction markets gambling. And then Coinbase is coming in and saying, look, this is clearly federally preempted. These are CFTC jurisdiction instruments. How do you see that playing out? Or how did you view kind of prediction markets, in your time as at the CFTC?
So event contracts or prediction markets is something that the CFTC has been looking at since, again, the 1990s. I think in 1992 is maybe when the CFTC provided, I think like no action relief to allow a small scale prediction market to operate. It's like the Iowa, I think, electronic market. And then there had been a lot of interest, there had been a lot of discussion, there had been, different innovations. And so that led to the CFTC in 2008 actually doing a request for comment on all different aspects of event contracts and what was called at the time information markets, which I actually really like thinking about it that way, information markets. And so they're like 24 like super thoughtful questions. And it was a holistic way to understand the benefit and the value of these markets and also how they fit into the CFTC's mission and the CFTC's, what is the public interest in the CFTC's jurisdiction. So in the CFTC's jurisdiction, our statute says that our markets have a national public interest because of the role that they play in price risk mitigation, price discovery, and price dissemination. So to me, I think logically, everything that we regulate needs to have some connection to that. That's the public interest that we serve. That's the purpose of the markets that we oversee. So that's just one thing. At the beginning of this year, I actually tried to reopen that comment period. It's not hard, right? You have a vote, you reopen the comment period. We didn't even need to rewrite anything. It's just like reopening the comment period so people can, answer the questions. Like almost 20 years later, with everything that we now know and have developed, since that time, right? And I couldn't believe it, but it didn't get the votes. And this is wild to me. Why do you not want to vote for a public comment period so that way the public can weigh in on all sides, right? A lot of people have a lot of different opinions and they should all get their opportunity to provide those opinions. So I think if we had been able to do that request for comment back in, I think February or March is when I tried to do it. I also think maybe this year we would have had more regulatory clarity instead of like ending up in the courts maybe. But anyway, so going back to what I said about information markets. So this is where I think, again, just looking towards the future, right? Part of what I did when I was at Citi was to kind of be part of this team that would look like 10, 20 years into the future and just kind of think like, what does the world look like at that time? And then so, what do clients and communities need and what does financial services look like? And, just what does life look like in the future? So when I think about that, you look at Gen AI, you look at AI slop, you look at like disinformation or misinformation and, like what is truth? Like what is real? What is fake? I think information is the most valuable commodity of all. And so having information markets that's able to use the wisdom of the crowd to, take all the information available about something and then to come up with it expressed through a price. I mean, that's exactly how the stock market works. So when you look at a stock price, it's everything about that company. It's the management, it's capital position, it's the strategy, it's the product. It's all of that, all expressed in a price. And so I actually think there's so much value in information markets. And that's why I think it's important to get it right.
I think AI slop has got to be the word of the year, right?
I'm sick of it. I'm so sick of the slop. Yeah.
It's a good one.
I hate it, but it's like, it's so good. Caroline, we can't let you go without asking about market structure. You, as your position as the top regulator, you had a unique look into the whole process. You had conversations with the senators leading it and also the House leaders leading the process as well. From what you're hearing, what does 2026 look like for getting this bill done finally?
Everybody's working really hard on it.
Yeah.
Right. So everybody's working really hard on it. Everybody wants to get it done. I think, it is coming down to kind of rolling up your sleeves and getting into the nitty gritty. And so we just have to see how that goes. But I think it's like a top priority. So we'll just have to see what happens in, January and February.
And then the CFTC will play a role in implementing some of those rulemakings, right? I know you implemented the CEO Advisory Council, who will probably help with some of that, but a lot of that will fall on the CFTC.
Oh, yeah. So, all of the different drafts of market structure legislation contemplate the agencies writing rules, right? Whichever agencies it falls to. I mean, if you look at Genius Act implementation, right, the bank regulators have to draft rules under that act to implement Genius. So it's the same thing with market structure legislation. So, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important to have, Mike over at the agency because Mike was a law firm partner. He was the SEC Crypto Task Force Chief Counsel. He was a senior advisor, senior counsel to SEC Chairman Paul Atkins. I mean, when job number one is writing rules, you want somebody who can be really hands-on, who has the technical expertise to make sure that we get the rules right, because it's really hard to change rules. I mean, kind of the big thing that I was doing all year that sort of nobody really paid attention to, but I was literally cleaning up 15 years of Dodd-Frank mess. I mean, all of these no action letters, all of these rules that were overly burdensome, duplicative, unnecessary, excessively costly. I mean, just from cleaning up Dodd-Frank, 15 years of just the CFTC just trying to rush to get something out and not really paying attention if it was good or not good. So that took 15 years to fix it. And I estimate that we have probably saved the industry or market participants hundreds of millions of dollars in compliance costs just from having these, duplicative, unnecessary, excessive requirements, some of which the CFTC realized right in 2012 when it implemented the rules, like immediately kind of figured out that they didn't work, provided relief back then, but, never created sort of durable clarity around it, right? And so it's important that we don't repeat past mistakes with this market structure legislation.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that all plays out. But Caroline, before we actually let you go this time, we always like to ask our guests, can you leave us with something else that you're watching that we didn't discuss that you think is important that our audience looks into?
I do think that 2026 is the year of institutional adoption. That is actually kind of the point of a lot of what the crypto sprint was about. So again, let me give you an example about why listed spot crypto is so important on the futures exchanges. Because they're futures exchanges, all of the trading firms, the market makers, brokers, banks, asset managers, they're already plugged into them. There are very clear compliance and risk management frameworks. The operational, pipes are there and all set up. So what happens is that you have a market maker who's going to come and provide that initial liquidity on the futures exchange, which they already do that for all different kinds of futures already, right? Once you have good liquidity on the futures exchange, right? It's not some offshore platform where there might be 30% wash trading or, all front running or other kinds of things that are going on. So you know that it's good liquidity. Well, that's going to attract real money cryptos, right? That's going to attract your Bitcoin ETFs, your digital asset treasuries, people who are managing large amounts of crypto. They're going to want to come to the good liquidity. And again, it meets all of their requirements around governance and fiduciary duty and all of those kinds of things. Once you have real money cryptos coming in and bringing that volume onto a futures exchange, then you're going to bring in the rest of the ecosystem. You're going to have more dealers come in, and then you're going to end up with what is a very efficient market. And so I think that's why I've noticed that, some people are starting to really digest and do write-ups of the impact of the listed spot crypto. And they're saying, what I just outlined for you. And it's because I worked in markets. I worked in markets, and, this is what the markets, institutional markets, have been focused on and working towards, again, since 2018. And so you're going to have institutional adoption, which means you're going to have, more liquid, more well-functioning, more efficient markets. Costs are going to go down. The spreads are going to be tighter. And I think that together with the tokenized collateral is going to just really unlock the benefits of blockchain technology as financial market infrastructure. So just, better rails.
2026, the year of institutional crypto.
Can't wait.
Amazing. Caroline, thank you so much for coming on. We all know that your schedule is insanely busy. You just literally wrapped up yesterday. Now you're in MoonPay's office, already getting to work, I'd imagine. But thank you so much for taking the time. Seriously.
Thank you. It's great to be on the show.